My name is Phil Carter, and at 34, I never thought my own restaurant would become the stage for the most humiliating moment of my life. Every year, I host my brother Mark's birthday dinner, hoping that this time he might finally see me as an equal. Instead, I got a public reminder of where I stood in his eyes. The crazy part? What started as my greatest shame ended up being the moment that changed everything for the better. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know if you've ever been disrespected by family. And make sure to subscribe to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of being pushed around. Growing up in suburban Massachusetts, Mark and I shared a typical middle-class upbringing. Our dad worked as an insurance agent, while Mom taught third grade at the local elementary school. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house with a small backyard where Mark and I would play catch when we were younger. Back then, being only 3 years apart, we were actually pretty close. I looked up to him, followed him around, and wanted to be just like my big brother. That all started to change when Mark entered high school. Suddenly, he became one of the popular kids. He joined the football team, started dating cheerleaders, and developed this new personality around his friends. I noticed how he would act differently when his friends were around versus when it was just us at home. The way he talked to me changed too. Where once he was protective and encouraging, he became dismissive and sometimes even cruel. That's just what Phil does, he would say when friends came over and saw me cooking. He likes playing with food while the rest of us focus on things that actually matter. But cooking wasn't just playing to me. It was my passion from the moment I was tall enough to reach the counter, standing on a chair. By 15, I had convinced a local Italian restaurant owner to hire me as a dishwasher, and within 6 months, I had worked my way up to prep cook. While Mark was at football practice, I was learning how to properly julienne vegetables and make sauces from scratch. After high school, our paths diverged even further. Mark went to an Ivy League college on a partial athletic scholarship, while I enrolled in culinary school. He majored in finance, graduated with honors, and landed a job at a prestigious firm in Boston. I worked my way through various kitchens, learning everything I could from every chef willing to teach me. The hours were brutal, the pay was terrible, but I loved every minute of it. Opening Harvest Table 4 years ago was the culmination of a dream I'd held on to for over a decade. It took everything I had. I emptied my savings account, took out loans I wasn't sure I could repay, and worked 18-hour days for months. The location wasn't ideal, tucked away on a side street just outside Boston's main dining district, but it was all I could afford. The first year was touch and go. There were nights I would sit in the empty dining room after closing, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Slowly, though, people started coming. A positive review in a local food blog brought in the first wave of curious diners. Then a feature in Boston Magazine about up-and-coming chefs put us on the map. I built relationships with local farmers, changed the menu seasonally based on what was fresh, and poured my heart into every dish. The restaurant became my life, my identity, my family. Meanwhile, Mark climbed the corporate ladder with the same determination he had shown on the football field. He bought a luxury condo downtown, drove a car that cost more than my annual revenue the first year, and surrounded himself with people just like him, successful, wealthy, and in my more honest moments, I would admit, shallow. Our parents had been the glue holding us together as adults. Sunday dinners at their house every other week forced us to maintain at least a semblance of a relationship. Mom would always try to bridge the gap between us, highlighting my accomplishments to Mark, and vice versa. Dad was quieter but would occasionally pull me aside and say things like, "Your brother respects what you're doing, even if he doesn't know how to show it." I wasn't so sure. Mark had never eaten at my restaurant until our parents insisted on celebrating their anniversary there 3 years ago. Even then, he spent most of the evening on his phone, barely commenting on the food except to say it was nice. When they passed away 2 years ago, first Dad from a heart attack, then Mom from what the doctors called natural causes, but what I believe was a broken heart just 6 months later, Mark and I became all the family either of us had left. That's when the birthday dinner tradition started. Mark would call once a year, usually a week before his birthday, asking to reserve a table. He would bring his friends, order expensive wine, and treat the evening like a night out at any random restaurant rather than his brother's life's work. Still, every year I hoped things would be different. that he would see my success on my terms, that we might find our way back to being brothers again instead of strangers connected by blood and awkward memories. This year marked his 40th birthday. I told myself this time would be different. This time, I would make more effort. This time, he would finally see me. The call came exactly 8 days before his birthday. I was in the middle of prepping for dinner service when my phone rang. "Harvest table, this is Phil," I answered, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder as I continued chopping herbs. "Phil, it's Mark. I need the best table for Saturday. There will be 8 of us. No hello, no how are you. Just straight to the point." "Your birthday?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "Yeah, 7:30 work? We'll want the private room." The private dining room was typically reserved for parties of 10 or more, but I didn't point this out. "Of course, I'll take care of it personally." "Great, see you then." The line went dead before I could say anything else. Despite the abruptness of the call, I felt a familiar flicker of hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe hitting 40 would make Mark reflective, more appreciative of family. I spent the next week planning every detail. I selected the best seasonal ingredients, designed a special menu, and even drove 2 hours to a specific farm to get the heirloom tomatoes I knew would make the perfect appetizer. The day of the dinner, I came in early to transform the private dining room. I arranged for fresh flowers, made sure the lighting was perfect, and personally polished every piece of silverware and glassware. Jessica, my head chef who had been with me since we opened, raised an eyebrow when she saw me fussing over the table settings. "All this for your brother who can barely be bothered to say thank you?" she asked, hands on her hips. "He's family, Jess. He's all I've got." She shook her head but didn't push the issue. Jessica had met Mark enough times over the years to form her own opinion. At 7:25, I was standing near the entrance when Mark and his entourage arrived. I could tell they had already been drinking elsewhere. Mark's cheeks were flushed, his voice a few decibels louder than appropriate for the setting. He was dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, a flashy watch glinting on his wrist. "Phil," he called out, giving me a quick one-armed hug that felt more like a pat on the back. The big 4-0. Can you believe it? Where did the time go? Before I could answer, he was already turning to introduce his friends. "This is my little brother, the cook," he said, emphasizing the word cook in a way that made it sound less than it was. "Chef," one of the women in the group corrected with a smile. "And owner, right? That's impressive." Yeah, chef, cook, whatever." Mark waved his hand dismissively. "Phil, these are the people who keep me sane. That's David and his wife Rachel, Michael from the firm, Thomas and his girlfriend Stephanie, and these lovely ladies are Jennifer and Alyssa." I greeted each of them with a handshake and led the group to the private room. I had instructed the staff to treat them like royalty, and the service began immediately with champagne I had specifically selected for the occasion. "I thought we could start with a toast," I said, raising my glass, to Mark. "Happy birthday, brother!" The group echoed the sentiment, and for a brief moment, Mark's expression softened. He nodded at me, and I felt that familiar surge of hope. "So Phil," Thomas called out, "Mark says, you've been running this place for what, 3 years now?" 4, I corrected gently. "And it's doing well? Making money?" "These restaurant ventures are risky business." His tone was patronizing, as if he were speaking to a child about a lemonade stand. "We're doing very well," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "We've been fortunate to receive some great press and build a loyal clientele." Mark jumped in. "Phil's always been stubborn. Mom and Dad wanted him to go into something more stable, but he insisted on this cooking thing. Guess it worked out okay though, right?" The way he said it made it clear he didn't really think it had worked out all that well. I felt my hope begin to flicker. "The first round of appetizers should be out shortly," I said, changing the subject. "I've prepared a special menu for tonight. Things I think you'll all enjoy. As long as there's steak for the main course, I'm happy," Michael said. "Medium rare, with a good bottle of red." "Absolutely," I assured him, though I had actually planned a more innovative main course. I made a mental note to tell Jessica we needed to add steak to the lineup. As I turned to leave, Mark called out, "Hey, bring us a bottle of that Camus Special Selection if you've got it. The 2018. I nodded, though I knew that bottle retailed for over $200. I had a few in my wine cellar, saved for very special occasions. I told myself this qualified. As I headed back to the kitchen, I could hear the laughter resuming behind me. I paused just outside the door and heard Mark's voice clearly. Yeah, it's cute what he's doing here. Not exactly the French Laundry, but it keeps him busy. More laughter. I stood frozen for a moment, then pushed through the door to the kitchen, my chest tight. Back in the kitchen, I threw myself into preparing the special appetizers I had planned. Jessica watched me with concern as I aggressively chopped vegetables and barked orders at the line cooks. "You okay?" she asked quietly when she caught me alone by the walk-in refrigerator. "Fine," I replied curtly. "Mark's just being Mark." She didn't push further, but I could feel her eyes on me as I meticulously plated the first course, a trio of small bites representing the best of early summer produce. The heirloom tomato tartare with basil oil and microgreens that I'd driven hours to source, a chilled sweet pea soup with mint and creme fraiche, and finally, a perfect scallop with brown butter and lemon. Simple but refined. The kind of food that had earned us our reputation. I carried the plates out myself, setting them down with pride. "This is a celebration of early summer," I explained, describing each component of the dish. "The tomatoes are from a small family farm in western Massachusetts. They're only available for about 3 weeks each year." Mark took a perfunctory bite and nodded. Not bad, but his friend Michael pushed his plate away after barely tasting it. "Sorry, I'm not really into raw tomato stuff. Can I get some mozzarella sticks or something?" I blinked, momentarily speechless. Mozzarella sticks? At harvest table? "The kitchen would be happy to prepare something else," I said, maintaining my professional demeanor. "Perhaps a warm goat cheese with toasted bread?" "Nah, I was just hoping for something more normal, you know?" Michael looked to Mark. "Your brother's place is pretty fancy, huh?" Mark laughed. "Phil's always been into that gourmet stuff. Too good for regular food. We can certainly prepare something more straightforward," I offered, swallowing my pride. "Don't bother," Mark said. "Just bring us that wine I asked for, and we'll wait for the main course. Steaks for everyone, right guys?" The group murmured in agreement, and I nodded stiffly before retreating to the kitchen. I grabbed the bottle of Camus from the wine cellar, mentally calculating how much Mark's casual dismissal of my carefully planned menu was going to cost me. The wine alone was $200, not to mention the special ingredients I'd sourced for dishes they weren't even going to eat. "They want steaks," I told Jessica as I re-entered the kitchen. "All of them." She looked up from the delicate fish dish she had been preparing according to my original menu. "Steaks?" "But we spent all day preparing the halibut with that lemon beurre blanc and the spring vegetables." "I know," I sighed. "But the customer is always right, even when the customer is my brother." "Your brother is an ass," Jessica muttered. But she immediately began adjusting our plans, directing the staff to prepare 8 perfectly cooked ribeyes instead of the thoughtful, seasonal menu I had designed. I returned to the dining room with the wine, uncorking it and pouring a taste for Mark. He barely looked at it before nodding his approval. As I poured glasses for everyone, I could hear snippets of their conversation. "Phil's place is fine for what it is," Mark was saying, "but you should see the restaurant I took clients to last week in New York. That was a real dining experience." I pretended not to hear as I finished pouring, but my hands shook slightly. "So Phil," David called out, seeming to notice my discomfort, "how did you get into the restaurant business?" Before I could answer, Mark jumped in. "Oh, Phil's been playing with food since we were kids. Remember that time you tried to make dinner for Mom and Dad's anniversary and nearly burned the house down?" He turned to his friends with a grin. He was like 12, trying to make some fancy French dish he saw on TV. The smoke alarms went off, and the neighbors called the fire department. Dad was so pissed. Everyone laughed, and I forced a smile. That wasn't how it happened at all. I had been 14, not 12, and the smoke was from a stuck oven door, not my cooking. Dad hadn't been angry. He'd been proud I'd tried to do something special. But Mark had always remembered it his way, the version that made for a better story at my expense. "Anyway," Mark continued, "while I was busting my ass in college, Phil here was learning to make pretty plate decorations." More laughter. I excused myself, claiming I needed to check on their steaks. As I pushed through the kitchen door, I heard Mark call after me, "And bring another bottle of that wine." In the kitchen, I leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Jessica glanced over from where she was supervising the steaks. "That bad?" she asked. "Worse," I admitted. "I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. Every year I think it'll be different, and every year he finds new ways to make me feel like nothing I do matters." "Then stop," Jessica said simply. "Stop seeking his approval. Stop letting him dictate how you feel about yourself and what you've built here." I knew she was right, but it was harder than it sounded. Mark was my only family now. If I cut him off, who did I have left? I returned to the dining room with the steaks, each perfectly cooked, accompanied by roasted potatoes and seasonal vegetables. I had instructed the kitchen to make them exceptional, despite the last-minute change. My pride wouldn't allow me to serve anything less than our best, even to people who couldn't appreciate it. As I set down the plates, I noticed Mark and his friends had already finished the first bottle of expensive wine and were halfway through the second. Their voices had gotten louder, and I could see other diners casting occasional glances toward the private room, whose door had been left open. "Finally, real food," Michael exclaimed, cutting into his steak. "At least they seem to appreciate this course, though the way they doused the carefully seasoned meat in steak sauce made my chef's heart cringe." Mark waved me over. "We're going to need more wine. Bring us 2 bottles of that Jordan Cabernet you have on your list." I nodded, calculating the mounting bill in my head. The Jordan wasn't as expensive as the Caymus, but at $120 a bottle, it wasn't cheap either. Mark had never discussed payment, but in previous years, he had always covered the bill for his party, occasionally with a perfunctory family discount comment that implied I should reduce the total. As the evening progressed, I found myself retreating more and more to the kitchen, unable to bear the increasingly loud and disrespectful behavior from Mark's table. They had moved from casual dismissal of my food to actively complaining about the service, the ambiance, even the music selection. I heard Mark telling a story about how I had cried when he broke my action figure when we were kids, twisting the tale to make me sound pathetic rather than him cruel. Jessica found me hiding by the dessert station, staring blankly at the row of carefully crafted chocolate creations meant for Mark's table. "You don't deserve this," she said firmly. "No one does, but especially not from family." I looked up at her, suddenly feeling very tired. What am I supposed to do? Cause a scene? He's still my brother. "Is he?" she asked. "Because from where I'm standing, he's just a customer being exceptionally rude to the owner and chef of this establishment, and we have policies about how we handle rude customers." I managed a small smile at that. "I can't throw my brother out of my restaurant on his birthday." "Maybe not," she agreed. "But you don't have to keep taking the abuse either." With a deep breath, I picked up the tray of desserts and headed back out. It was almost over. I just had to get through dessert, and they would leave. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I could go back to pretending that next year would somehow be different. I entered the private dining room carrying a tray of my signature desserts, a trio of chocolate creations that had been featured in Boston Magazine's Best Desserts issue last year. Despite everything, I still held onto a shred of hope that this final course might earn some genuine appreciation. The conversation at the table stopped abruptly as I appeared. Mark and his friends were louder now, the empty wine bottles testament to how much they'd had to drink. I set the desserts down carefully, explaining each component. "This is a dark chocolate mousse with salted caramel center, a white chocolate panna cotta with raspberry coulis, and a chocolate hazelnut torte with gold leaf." "Fancy," Thomas remarked, his tone making it unclear whether this was a compliment or criticism. I hesitated, then decided to join them for dessert, pulling up a chair at the end of the table. Mark raised an eyebrow as I sat down. "This table's for family only," he said with a smirk, pointing toward a corner table where the waitstaff sometimes took their breaks. "Why don't you go sit over there? That seems more your speed." The table erupted in laughter. I sat frozen, the words like a physical blow. "Family only?" I was his only family. "Come on, Mark," I said quietly. "That's not funny." "Oh, lighten up, Phil. Always so serious about everything." Mark turned to his friends. He was like this as a kid too, so sensitive. "Remember when you tried out for the baseball team in 9th grade? This was directed back at me. You practiced for weeks, and then you struck out every time at bat during tryouts. You came home crying like a baby." His friends chuckled, and Mark, encouraged, continued his walk down memory lane at my expense. "Or what about your junior prom? What was her name again? Melissa, the one who ditched you for the quarterback?" "Rebecca," I corrected automatically, the old wound surprisingly still tender. "Her name was Rebecca." "Right, Rebecca," Mark laughed. "She took one look at the restaurant where you worked and decided she deserved better. Can't blame her, really. Who wants to date a guy who smells like kitchen grease all the time?" His friends were laughing harder now, and Jennifer chimed in, "God, I could never date a chef. The hours are terrible, and they never make any real money." "Exactly," Mark agreed. "That's what I tried to tell him when he dropped out of college to go to cooking school. What a waste of potential. Our parents were so disappointed." That wasn't true. My parents had been supportive of my decision, proud when I graduated at the top of my class. But Mark had always rewritten our history to suit his narrative. I sat silently, absorbing blow after blow, as Mark continued to entertain his friends with stories of my failures, each one twisted to make me look foolish and him wise. With each story, I felt myself shrinking, becoming the little brother who could never measure up, never be good enough. "At least he lets us eat here for free," Michael added, raising his glass. "That's what family's for, right?" Mark laughed loudest of all at this. "Damn straight." Speaking of which, he gestured to our server who had been standing discreetly by the door. "We're ready for the check." The server looked to me uncertainly. I nodded, and she went to prepare the bill. When she returned, she handed it to me rather than Mark, following our usual protocol for the owner. Mark reached across the table and snatched it from my hands. He glanced at the total, whistled dramatically, and then slid it back to me with a broad grin. "Happy birthday to me," he announced to the table. "My generous little brother is picking up the tab, as usual. Family discount, right, Phil?" I looked down at the bill. The total came to $3,427. The wine alone accounted for nearly $2,000 of that. I felt sick. "Come on, Phil," Mark continued when I didn't immediately respond. "It's not like you're using that culinary school money for anything else. Might as well treat your successful big brother and his friends to a decent meal once a year." The laughter around the table felt distant now, as if I were hearing it underwater. Something was happening inside me, a lifetime of swallowed words and suppressed feelings rising to the surface. I stared at Mark, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. His expensive suit couldn't hide the bloat in his face from too much drinking. The confidence I had always envied now looked like arrogance, brittle and hollow. His friends weren't looking at him with respect, but with a kind of wary amusement, like they were watching a performer who might turn on them if they didn't laugh at the right moments. And suddenly, with perfect clarity, I understood. Mark wasn't mocking me because he was stronger or better. He was doing it because he needed to, because without putting me down, he didn't know how to lift himself up. All these years, I had been seeking approval from someone incapable of giving it, not because I didn't deserve it, but because he couldn't see past his own insecurities to acknowledge mine or anyone else's success. I thought of all the times I had let this happen, the previous birthday dinners, the dismissive comments at family gatherings, the way I had always made excuses for him, telling myself, that's just how brothers are, that deep down he must care about me. But caring isn't something that happens deep down. It happens in actions, in words, in the way you treat people. And by that measure, Mark had stopped caring about me a long time ago, if he ever truly had. As this realization washed over me, I felt something shift inside. The hurt was still there, but now it was joined by something else. Anger, yes, but also something steadier, more grounded, self-respect. The understanding that I deserved better than this, had always deserved better than this. I looked around the table at the people laughing at my expense, at the restaurant I had built with my own hands and heart, at the bill sitting between me and my brother like a gauntlet thrown down, and I made a decision. I picked up the check, looked at it once more, and then set it down deliberately in front of Mark. The laughter around the table faltered as everyone registered my unexpected move. "Actually," I said, my voice calm and steady, "there won't be a family discount tonight." Mark's smirk froze on his face. "What? You heard me." I stood up slowly, feeling strangely light, as if a weight I had carried my entire adult life had suddenly lifted. "Not only will there not be a discount, but there will be a 20% gratuity added for the exceptional service my staff has provided despite the disrespect they've endured all evening." The table fell completely silent. Mark's face flushed red, whether from embarrassment or anger. I couldn't tell. Probably both. "You can't be serious," he sputtered. "It's my birthday, Phil." "Yes, it is," I agreed. "And for your birthday, I specially selected ingredients, created a custom menu, and personally served you and your friends. I opened wine that I save for special occasions. I did all of this hoping that for once, just once, you might see what I've built here and feel something other than contempt for it." For me, I took a deep breath, aware that everyone at the table was staring at me. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed fascinated by the unfolding drama. Mark just looked shocked. "For years," I continued, "I've let you treat me like I'm still the little brother who needs your approval. I've swallowed every insult, laughed at every joke at my expense, covered every check, all because I thought that's what family does. That's what I do for my only remaining family." My voice cracked slightly, but I pressed on. "But tonight I realized something important. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect. It's about celebrating each other's successes instead of tearing them down. It's about treating people with dignity, especially the ones who care about you." I gestured around the restaurant. "This place that you so casually mock? It's not just a restaurant. It's my life's work. Those pretty plate decorations you laugh about? They've earned us recognition from food critics across New England. While you've been climbing your corporate ladder, I've been building something real. Something that brings people joy. That creates memories. That matters." Mark started to speak, but I held up my hand. "Not finished yet. You know what the ironic thing is? I don't even care about the money. What hurts is that you've never once, in 4 years, said you're proud of what I've accomplished. You've never brought clients here to show off your brother's successful business. You've never recommended us to friends unless it was to get a free meal. You've never seen me as your equal." I turned to address the whole table now. "So no, there won't be a family discount tonight. In fact, I've instructed the server to add an additional $500 to your bill, which will be donated to the culinary scholarship program at my old school in your names. Consider it your contribution to helping other chefs who might be told by their families that their dreams aren't worth pursuing." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face had gone from red to pale. He opened and closed his mouth several times before finally finding his voice. "You can't be serious," he said, but the bluster was gone, replaced by uncertainty. "This is ridiculous. I'm not paying $4,000 for dinner." "Then don't," I said simply. "Walk out, don't pay, and never come back to my restaurant again. But know that if you do that, we're done. Not just as business associates, but as brothers." I hadn't planned to say this, hadn't even known I was thinking it until the words left my mouth, but as soon as they did, I knew they were true. This was it, the line I was finally willing to draw. For a moment, I thought Mark might actually get up and leave. He looked around at his friends, perhaps seeking support, but found none. David was studiously examining his dessert fork. Rachel was looking at me with what seemed like respect. Thomas and Michael were avoiding eye contact altogether. But it was Jennifer who surprised me. "Mark," she said quietly, "just pay the bill." "What?" He turned to her, betrayed. "Pay it," she repeated more firmly. "You've been awful tonight. We all have. Your brother created a beautiful meal for us, and we've been nothing but rude. The least you can do is pay for what we consume." Mark gaped at her, then at his other friends who were now nodding in agreement. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "You're all taking his side?" "There shouldn't be sides," David said unexpectedly. "He's your brother, man, and from what I can see, he's done pretty well for himself. This place is fantastic. The food was incredible. Maybe instead of tearing him down to make yourself look bigger, you should consider that his success doesn't diminish yours." I stood in stunned silence. This was not how I had expected the evening to unfold. I had braced myself for more mockery, for Mark to storm out, for the final severing of our already fragile relationship. I hadn't anticipated that his friends might actually see the situation clearly, might choose decency over loyalty to Mark's cruelty. Mark looked cornered. He glanced from face to face, then back at me, his expression a complex mix of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. Finally, he pulled out his wallet and tossed his credit card onto the bill. "Fine," he said tightly. "Charge whatever you want." I picked up the card and the bill, maintaining eye contact with my brother. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. Not for the payment itself, but for what it represented. A small acknowledgement, perhaps the first, that I deserved to be treated with respect. I handed both to the server, who had been waiting discreetly nearby. As she left to process the payment, an awkward silence fell over the table. Some of Mark's friends began to gather their things, clearly eager to escape the tension. "I think we should go," Michael suggested, standing up. "It's getting late." Mark nodded stiffly, not looking at me. The others murmured agreement and began to rise, thanking me with a politeness that had been absent all evening. As they filed out, Mark lingered behind, waiting until we were alone. I expected anger, accusations, maybe even threats about how I'd regret this. Instead, he just looked tired. "You've changed," he said finally. "No," I replied. "I've just stopped letting you define who I am." He nodded slowly, as if this made sense to him. "I'll see you around, Phil." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even really a concession. But it was, perhaps, an acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted between us. "Goodbye, Mark," I said, not agreeing or disagreeing with his statement. Whether I would see him around remained to be seen. For the first time, that decision felt like it was mine to make. As I watched him walk out of my restaurant, I felt neither triumph nor despair. Just a quiet certainty that I had finally done the right thing, not just for my business, but for myself. The next morning, I woke up with a strange combination of emotional exhaustion and liberation. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the previous night. Had I gone too far? Not far enough? Would Mark ever speak to me again? Did I even want him to? My phone showed 3 missed calls and 5 text messages, all from Mark. I wasn't ready to read them yet. Instead, I got up and went through my morning routine, trying to find comfort in the familiar rhythm of shower, coffee, breakfast. By the time I arrived at the restaurant for lunch prep, word had spread among the staff about what had happened. Jessica met me at the door with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. "You okay?" she asked, following me into my office. "I think so," I replied, surprised to find it was true. "It was a long time coming." "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "That took guts." I managed a small smile. "Thanks. I'm not sure what happens now. Now you run your restaurant and live your life without walking on eggshells around your jerk of a brother," Jessica said matter-of-factly. "And maybe, if you're very lucky, he'll do some reflecting and realize what an ass he's been." I appreciated her optimism, but wasn't counting on it. Mark had spent decades crafting his identity as the successful older brother with the screw-up younger sibling. It wasn't a narrative he was likely to abandon easily. What I hadn't expected was the reaction from Mark's friends. Around 2 that afternoon, while I was checking inventory, the hostess informed me that David, the investment banker from Mark's party, was asking to speak with me. I found him waiting in the dining room, looking slightly uncomfortable in his expensive suit, amid the lunch crowd of mostly casual diners. "Phil," he greeted me with an extended hand. "Thanks for seeing me. Do you have a minute?" I led him to a quiet table in the corner. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize for last night," he said, getting straight to the point. The way we all behaved was inexcusable. I was taken aback by his directness. "I appreciate that, but it's not necessary." "It is," he insisted. "And I also wanted to talk to you about your brother, if that's okay." I tensed slightly but nodded for him to continue. "Mark and I have known each other since college," David explained. "He's always been competitive, driven, the kind of guy who needs to be the best at everything. But the last few years, he's gotten worse. More cutting, more focused on status and appearances." I listened, not sure where this was going. "The thing is," David continued, lowering his voice, "he's not doing as well as he pretends. There have been problems at the firm, bad investments, clients leaving. He's on thin ice. The fancy apartment, the car, it's all leveraged to the hilt. He's barely staying afloat." This information hit me like a physical blow. Mark, struggling? It seemed impossible. He had always been the successful one, the one who had it all figured out. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. David shrugged. "Because what you said last night got to me, about family supporting each other. Mark's my friend, and I've been enabling his worst behavior for years because it was easier than calling him out. But watching him treat you that way, his only brother, made me realize I haven't been much of a friend." He pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "Your restaurant is amazing, Phil. Truly. I host a lot of business dinners, and I'd like to start bringing clients here. Real paying customers. No discount expected." I picked up the card, oddly touched. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," David said with a small smile. "Wait until you see if I'm good for my word." After he left, I sat for a long time, trying to process what I'd learned. Mark's perfect life wasn't so perfect after all. His confidence was a facade, his success exaggerated. In a strange way, it made his behavior toward me more understandable, if not more excusable. He had been tearing me down to build himself up, using my supposed failures to distract from his own. Finally, I pulled out my phone and read Mark's messages. They started with angry accusations, then moved to self-justification, before the final one simply said, "We should talk." I texted back a simple response, "Not ready yet. Need time." Then I turned off my phone and went back to work, losing myself in the comfortable familiarity of my kitchen. The days turned into weeks. David kept his promise, bringing business associates for dinner regularly. Each time, he paid full price and left generous tips. A couple of Mark's other friends came in as well, Jennifer with her family, Thomas with clients. They were respectful, appreciative of the food, and seemingly eager to make amends for that birthday dinner. Mark himself kept his distance, though he sent occasional text messages. Nothing substantive, just brief check-ins. "Hope you're well. Saw the article about the restaurant in the Globe. Congratulations." I responded with equally brief acknowledgments, not ready for more. As Thanksgiving approached, I found myself thinking more about family. With our parents gone, and Mark and I in this strange limbo, I faced the prospect of my first holiday alone. Jessica, intuiting my melancholy, suggested we host a family dinner at the restaurant for staff who didn't have plans. "We're your family too, you know," she said. "The kind you choose." The idea gave me comfort, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unresolved with Mark. After much deliberation, I texted him, "Coffee tomorrow? 2 p.m. at Common Ground." His response was immediate, "I'll be there." The coffee shop was neutral territory, public enough that we would both behave, private enough for an honest conversation. Mark arrived precisely at 2, looking different somehow, less polished, more human. The designer suit was replaced by jeans and a sweater. He'd lost weight, and there was a weariness in his eyes I hadn't noticed before. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, sitting down across from me. "I wasn't sure you would want to." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. An awkward silence fell between us. We had spent so many years maintaining our assigned roles that neither of us seemed to know how to begin a real conversation. "I'm sorry," Mark said finally. The words came out stiff, unpracticed. "For the birthday dinner. For a lot of things." I nodded, acknowledging his apology without immediately accepting it. "Why?" I asked. "Why has it always been like this between us?" Mark stared into his coffee. "I don't know." "No, that's not true." "I do know." He sighed heavily. "You were always the special one, Phil. The creative one. The one with passion. Mom and Dad used to brag about you all the time. Phil made this amazing meal. Phil has such a gift. I was just the one who did what was expected. Good grades. Good college. Good job." I was stunned. This was the opposite of how I had always seen our relationship. "Are you serious? They were so proud of you. The Ivy League, the finance career. You were their success story." Mark gave a bitter laugh. "They were proud of my accomplishments, not of me. There's a difference. They were proud of for who you are." We sat with this revelation, each recalibrating our understanding of our shared past. How strange that we had both felt like the lesser son, each envying what the other had. "David came to see me," I said, eventually. "He mentioned you've been having some problems at work." Mark's face tightened. "David talks too much." He was concerned. "As a friend." "Yeah, well," Mark shrugged. "It's been a tough couple of years. Some investments didn't pan out. I've had to downsize. Sold the condo, moved to a rental in Somerville. The car's gone too. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. And meant it. Don't be, he replied with surprising candor. It's probably the best thing that could have happened to me. Forced me to figure out what actually matters. Another silence, less awkward this time. So what now? I asked. Where do we go from here? Mark looked me in the eye, perhaps really seeing me for the first time in years. I don't know. Can we start over? Not pretend the past didn't happen, but try to build something different going forward? It wasn't a simple question, and I didn't have a simple answer. The hurt of years couldn't be erased in one conversation. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend easily. But he was still my brother, my only blood family. And maybe, just maybe, we could create something better than what we'd had before. We can try, I said finally. One step at a time. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, not yet. But it was an opening, a willingness to see if something new could grow in the space between us. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of peace. Standing up to Mark had changed more than just our relationship. It had changed me. I walked back to my restaurant with a new confidence, a certainty in my own worth that didn't depend on anyone else's validation. For perhaps the first time, I was truly comfortable in my own skin, proud of what I had built, and ready to see where this new chapter might lead. 6 months have passed since that night when I finally stood up to Mark. Spring has given way to summer, and Harvest Table is busier than ever. David kept his word about bringing clients, and word of mouth has spread. We're now booked solid weeks in advance, and I've had to hire additional staff to keep up with demand. But the changes in my business pale in comparison to the changes in me. That moment of standing firm, of refusing to accept disrespect even from family, marked a turning point in how I see myself and my place in the world. Mark and I have been rebuilding our relationship, slowly and with occasional setbacks. We meet for coffee every couple of weeks, sometimes talking about our childhood, sometimes about our current lives. The conversations aren't always easy, but they're honest in a way they never were before. He's made changes too. After eventually losing his position at the firm, he took some time to reassess his priorities. Last month, he started a new job at a smaller company with a focus on ethical investing. The pay is less, the prestige diminished, but when he talks about it, there's a genuine enthusiasm I haven't heard from him in years. I'm not defining myself by my business card anymore, he told me during our last meeting. It's liberating. I understand what he means. I used to think I needed his approval, or at least his acknowledgement, to validate my success. Now, I know better. My worth isn't determined by his or anyone else's recognition. It's in the restaurant I've built, the team I've assembled, the customers who return week after week, because what we create matters to them. The most unexpected outcome of that confrontation has been my partnership with David. After months of bringing clients to Harvest Table, he approached me with a business proposition. He wanted to invest in my restaurant, to provide the capital for me to expand to a second location. No controlling interest, no creative interference, just the financial backing to grow what I had already proven I could build. After careful consideration and thorough legal review, I accepted. We're now in the process of securing a space in Cambridge for a second Harvest Table, with Jessica set to take over as head chef there while I divide my time between both locations. But perhaps the most meaningful change has been in how I think about family. Mark is my brother, and we're working on what that means. But family is also Jessica, who has stood by me from the beginning. It's my staff, who pour their hearts into making Harvest Table a success. It's even David, who saw value in me when my own brother couldn't. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, support, and genuine care. It's about surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your victories rather than diminishing them, who see your struggles as opportunities to help rather than weaknesses to exploit. The most profound lesson I've learned through all of this is that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. By allowing Mark to treat me with disrespect, I wasn't preserving our relationship. I was enabling its dysfunction. Only by drawing a boundary, by demanding the treatment I deserved, could we have any hope of building something healthier. Every Sunday now, when the restaurant is closed, I host what we call family dinner for my staff. We cook together, eat together, and share stories about our weeks. It's become a tradition that everyone looks forward to, a time when hierarchy disappears, and we're just people who care about each other enjoying a meal. Last month, somewhat hesitantly, I invited Mark to join us. He seemed uncomfortable at first, this corporate finance guy surrounded by chefs and servers. But by the end of the evening, he was helping wash dishes and laughing at Jessica's outrageous kitchen stories. As he was leaving, he pulled me aside. "I get it now," he said quietly. "What you've built here. It's not just a restaurant. It's a community." Coming from Mark, this was high praise indeed. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my brother. I'm cautiously optimistic but also realistic. Some wounds take a long time to heal, and trust, once broken, is rebuilt slowly, if at all. But I do know that whatever happens, I'll be okay. More than okay. I'll continue to grow my business, nurture my chosen family, and live by the values that matter to me. The table is no longer just for family only in the narrow, exclusionary way Mark once meant it. Instead, it's expanded to include all who approach with respect, kindness, and authenticity. And at that table, everyone is welcome. Everyone belongs. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who treated you with disrespect? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to draw boundaries, even with family. Sometimes, standing up for yourself is the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for the relationship. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, you deserve a seat at the table, too.